Ethan and Claire seemed like the perfect couple, until a series of events shattered their trust. When Claire's emotional connection with a colleague, Adam, came to light, their marriage was thrown into turmoil. An anonymous letter further deepened the cracks, hinting at secrets Ethan couldn't ignore. As betrayal, suspicion, and unresolved pain threatened to tear them apart, both Ethan and Claire must confront their past choices and decide whether their love is strong enough to survive. Will they find a way back to each other, or will the weight of their mistakes prove too heavy to bear watch to find out? The year was 2015, and our story begins in the small, picturesque town of Willow Ridge. Nestled between rolling hills and a quiet river, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. At the center of this seemingly idyllic community was Ethan Miller, a 32-year-old architect with a reputation for being as meticulous in his personal life as he was with his blueprints. Ethan was thoughtful, reliable, and, most importantly, a man of his word. Ethan was married to Claire. A bright and ambitious journalist, Claire was everything Ethan wasn't. Spontaneous, outgoing, and always chasing the next big story. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. Their friends often joked that they were the quintessential opposites attract pair. But as with most perfect pictures, the cracks were easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Ethan and Claire had been married for 5 years, and while they loved each other deeply, their relationship had begun to shift. Ethan's job demanded long hours, often leaving him mentally exhausted and emotionally unavailable. Claire, on the other hand, thrived on excitement and connection, pouring her energy into her work as an investigative journalist. While Ethan found comfort in routine, Claire craved unpredictability, a stark contrast that slowly began to erode the foundation of their marriage. One evening, Ethan came home later than usual. His desk at the firm had been buried under a mountain of paperwork, and the commute through the winding roads of Willow Ridge had felt endless. When he walked into the house, the warm glow of the living room lights greeted him, but something was off. Claire wasn't in her usual spot on the couch, scrolling through her notes or brainstorming ideas for her next article. Instead, he found her in the kitchen, pacing with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Ethan didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the tension in her voice caught his attention. She was speaking to someone named Adam, and her words were quick, almost frantic. "I just don't know how long I can keep this up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt a flicker of unease, but pushed it aside, chalking it up to work stress. Claire often got this way when she was chasing a lead. When she finally hung up, Claire turned and saw Ethan standing in the doorway. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long day?" she asked, her tone casual, almost too casual. Ethan nodded and stepped forward to kiss her on the cheek, noticing the way she stiffened ever so slightly. The days that followed were marked by small, unsettling changes. Claire seemed distracted, her phone always within arm's reach, and her laughter feeling forced during their conversations. Ethan, ever the problem solver, decided to plan a weekend getaway to reconnect. He chose a cozy cabin by the lake, a place they had visited during the early days of their marriage. Claire agreed, but her enthusiasm felt muted, as though her heart wasn't truly in it. The trip started off well enough. They spent the first evening by the fire, sharing stories and sipping wine. For a moment, Ethan thought things might return to normal. But on the second day, while Claire was out for a walk, Ethan noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. The name Adam flashed across the screen, and this time, the unease he had felt earlier came rushing back with full force. Ethan debated whether to answer or ignore it, but ultimately decided against picking up the call. Instead, he chose to ask Claire directly when she returned. That evening, as they sat watching the sunset over the lake, Ethan worked up the courage to confront her. "Claire, who's Adam?" he asked, keeping his tone as neutral as possible. Her reaction was immediate and telling. She froze, her gaze darting away from his. Adam, he's just a colleague, she said quickly, a little too quickly. We're working on a story together. Ethan wanted to believe her. He truly did, but the nagging feeling in his chest wouldn't let him rest. He let the subject drop for the moment, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. When they returned home, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A week later, Ethan was in his office, reviewing blueprints for a new project, when a message popped up on his phone. It was from Claire. She was going to be working late at the office. Ethan didn't think much of it, until he remembered that her office had recently moved to a shared space across town. Curious and unable to silence the voice in his head, Ethan decided to bring her dinner as a surprise. When he arrived, the building was mostly dark, with only a few lights glowing in the windows. He climbed the stairs to Claire's floor and found her desk empty. His heart sank as he realized that her bag and jacket weren't there either. Panic began to set in as he scanned the room for any sign of her. Just then, a cleaning staff member approached. "Looking for someone?" they asked, their voice friendly but curious. "My wife," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Claire Miller." "Oh, I saw her leaving earlier," they replied. "She was with a man. I think they went to the cafe across the street." Ethan's stomach churned. He thanked them and left the building, his mind racing. Crossing the street, he approached the cafe and peered through the large glass windows. There, in the back corner, sat Claire, and a man he assumed was Adam. They were leaning in close, their expressions intense. Ethan couldn't hear what they were saying, but the sight of Claire placing her hand on Adam's arm was enough to shatter him. He turned and walked away, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and heartbreak. How had it come to this? Was there something he could have done differently? The image of Claire with Adam was burned into his mind, and for the first time, Ethan realized that their marriage might not survive this storm. Ethan spent the next few days in a haze of confusion and heartache. He replayed the image of Claire and Adam in the cafe over and over, trying to make sense of it. Every moment of their marriage flashed before him. The laughter, the shared dreams, the promises. Had it all been a lie, or had they simply lost their way? Determined to get to the bottom of things, Ethan decided to confront Claire, but not before arming himself with clarity. He wasn't one for baseless accusations. Instead, he spent an entire night reviewing their recent interactions, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. He even debated reaching out to her friends but quickly dismissed the idea. This was between him and Claire. The next evening, Claire came home late again, looking exhausted but composed. Ethan was waiting for her in the living room, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing for her to sit. Claire hesitated, but eventually joined him, her body language defensive. "I saw you," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with pain. "At the cafe with Adam." Claire's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw guilt flash across her face. "Ethan, it's not what you think," she said quickly. "Adam and I are working on a sensitive story. We needed privacy to discuss it." "Privacy?" Ethan echoed, his tone incredulous. "Then why didn't you tell me about it? Why has he been calling you late at night? Why are you so distant lately?" Claire opened her mouth to respond, but faltered. The truth was, she had been keeping things from Ethan, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she didn't know how to bridge the growing gap between them. "I didn't want to worry you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Work has been overwhelming, and I didn't know how to tell you." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Claire, do you even hear yourself? We're supposed to be a team. Whatever's going on, we need to face it together. I can't do this alone." Claire looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "I know," she admitted. "I've been so focused on my career that I've let our marriage take a back seat. But Adam, he's just a colleague, I promise." Ethan wanted to believe her. He truly did, but the cracks in their relationship were too wide to ignore. They decided to take a step back and reevaluate things, agreeing to communicate more openly moving forward. For a while, it seemed like they were making progress. They spent more time together, revisited old memories, and even planned a weekend getaway. But the tension lingered, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. A few weeks later, Ethan's doubts came roaring back. He was tidying up the house when he stumbled upon Claire's journal tucked away in the back of a drawer. Normally, he wouldn't invade her privacy, but something compelled him to open it. As he flipped through the pages, his heart sank. Amid entries about work and personal reflections, he found several mentions of Adam, his charm, his understanding nature, his undeniable connection with Claire. Ethan slammed the journal shut, his hands trembling. The entries weren't explicit, but they painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Claire might not have crossed physical boundaries, but emotionally, she was straying. And in some ways, that felt even worse. When Claire came home that evening, Ethan confronted her again, this time with the journal in hand. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice sharp. Claire froze, her face draining of color. "You read my journal?" she asked, her tone a mix of anger and disbelief. "Don't deflect," Ethan shot back. "You wrote about Adam, about feelings for him. How long has this been going on?" Claire took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Ethan, I never meant for it to happen," she admitted. "I've been feeling lost, and Adam. He made me feel seen, but I never acted on it, I swear." Ethan's chest tightened. "Feeling seen, Claire? I've been here the whole time, trying to make this work. If you needed something from me, why didn't you say so?" "I didn't know how," Claire cried, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to hurt you. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling invisible." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He realized that while he had been focusing on providing stability, he had neglected to nurture their emotional connection. But did that justify Claire's emotional affair? Ethan wasn't sure. They decided to seek counseling, hoping to rebuild their fractured marriage. The sessions were raw and uncomfortable, forcing them to confront truths they had long buried. Claire admitted her emotional dependence on Adam, while Ethan acknowledged his role in the emotional distance between them. For a moment, it seemed like they might be able to salvage their relationship, but fate had other plans. One afternoon, Ethan received an email from an unknown sender. It contained a series of photos, Claire and Adam, sitting close together in various settings, their body language intimate. The final photo was the most damning. Adam leaning in to kiss Claire, her expression unreadable but complicit. Ethan felt his world collapse. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal anymore. It was physical, or at least heading there. He forwarded the email to Claire with a single line. "Explain this." When Claire came home that evening, she found Ethan waiting, the hurt and anger in his eyes cutting deeper than any words could. "It was one kiss," she said, her voice trembling. "I ended it immediately, Ethan. I swear, I chose you." "But you still kissed him," Ethan replied, his voice hollow. "How am I supposed to trust you after this?" Claire fell silent, knowing there was no easy answer. She had made a terrible mistake, one that might cost her the man she loved. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," she said finally. "I'll quit my job, cut all ties with Adam, anything." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. Could they really rebuild from this? Or was the damage too great? He didn't have an answer yet, but one thing was clear: their marriage would never be the same. As Ethan and Claire faced the uncertain road ahead, one question lingered in both their minds. Could love truly conquer betrayal, Only time would tell. If you've been captivated by Ethan and Claire's story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know your thoughts. Should Ethan forgive Claire? Or is some damage beyond repair? And of course, subscribe to stay tuned for more stories like this one. The days following Claire's confession were a whirlwind of raw emotions. Ethan struggled to process the betrayal, while Claire tried desperately to make amends. She kept her promise, quitting her job and cutting all ties with Adam. She even deleted her social media accounts, determined to remove any trace of temptation or distraction. But for Ethan, the damage ran deeper than the actions. It was the breach of trust, the foundation of their marriage, that left him questioning everything. One evening, Ethan sat alone in his home office, staring at the framed photo of their wedding day on his desk. Claire's radiant smile, and the way she had looked at him with such love, felt like a distant memory now. He couldn't shake the images from the email, and the memory of her journal entries lingered like a ghost in the room. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the contact for their counselor. Then, in a moment of impulsive desperation, he called an old friend instead. Marcus, Ethan's childhood best friend, had always been the voice of reason. When Ethan poured out the entire story, Marcus listened in silence before finally speaking. "You need to decide what you want, Ethan," he said. "Do you want to fight for this marriage, or is it time to walk away? Either way, you can't stay in limbo forever." Ethan hung up, feeling no closer to an answer, but Marcus's words planted a seed. Could he forgive Claire and rebuild their life together? Or was it time to let go of a love that had caused so much pain? Meanwhile, Claire wasn't faring much better. She had moved into the guest room at Ethan's request, giving him the space he needed to process everything. But every night, she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed with regret. She knew she had made mistakes that had cost her Ethan's trust, and yet, she couldn't give up on the life they had built together. One afternoon, Claire decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to Ethan's sister, Sophie, who had always been like a confidant to her. Over coffee, Claire laid everything out: the emotional affair, the kiss, the distance that had grown between her and Ethan. "Sophie, I don't know what to do," Claire admitted, her voice trembling. "I've done everything I can think of to show Ethan that I'm committed to fixing this, but he won't even look at me the same way." Sophie sighed, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Claire, rebuilding trust takes time. Ethan's hurt, and he has every right to be. But if you want to save this marriage, you have to keep showing up even when it feels hopeless." Claire nodded, taking Sophie's words to heart. That evening, she wrote Ethan a letter, not to explain or justify her actions, but to share her feelings openly and honestly. She left it on his desk and hoped it might spark a conversation they desperately needed. When Ethan found the letter, he hesitated before opening it. His emotions had been a tangled mess, and the last thing he wanted was another reminder of the pain. But as he read Claire's heartfelt words, something shifted. She spoke of her love for him, her regret for the choices she had made, and her willingness to do whatever it took to make things right. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only a chance to prove she was still the woman he had fallen in love with. The letter lingered in Ethan's mind as the days passed. He couldn't deny that Claire was trying, but he also couldn't ignore the voice in his head that told him it might be too late. The final straw came when Ethan ran into Adam at a local cafe. The encounter was unexpected and uncomfortable. Adam seemed caught off guard, his confident demeanor faltering as Ethan approached. "Ethan," Adam began, his tone cautious. "I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'm sure you didn't," he replied coldly. "I assume you know Claire quit her job." Adam nodded, his expression unreadable. "I heard, look, I never meant to come between you two. Claire's a great person and, well, I think she made the right choice. Ethan's temper flared. The right choice? You don't get to talk about choices, Adam. You had no business getting involved with my wife. Adam raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. You're right, he said. I crossed a line, and I'm sorry. But for what it's worth, Claire never let it go further than that kiss. She loves you, Ethan. That much was always clear. Ethan walked away without another word, his thoughts racing. Adam's words should have offered some comfort, but they only deepened the ache in his chest. He knew Claire loved him, but was love enough to mend what had been broken? The breaking point came one rainy night when Ethan and Claire had their most explosive argument yet. They were sitting in the living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Claire had asked Ethan if he had read her letter, and his lack of response pushed her over the edge. Ethan, I can't keep living like this, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. I know I hurt you, but I'm trying. And all I get in return is silence. Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. Silence. You think that's all I'm giving you, Claire? I'm trying to figure out how to even look at you without seeing Adam in the picture. Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been for me? Claire's face crumpled, but she stood her ground. I know, Ethan. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I can't undo the past. All I can do is try to be better. And what if trying isn't enough? Ethan shot back. What if every time I look at you, all I feel is the betrayal? The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavy between them. Claire finally broke the silence, her voice barely audible. Then maybe you should let me go. Ethan stared at her, his heart breaking all over again. Is that what you want? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. No, Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I don't want to be the reason you're miserable. As the storm raged outside, Ethan and Claire found themselves at a crossroads. Both were exhausted, their love for each other buried beneath layers of hurt and regret. They agreed to take some time apart, hoping that distance might bring clarity. Ethan spent the next few weeks focusing on himself. He threw himself into work, reconnected with friends, and even started therapy to process his emotions. Claire, meanwhile, moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She also sought counseling, determined to understand the choices that had led her to this point. Though they were apart, neither could fully let go of the other. They exchanged occasional texts, small updates about their lives, but avoided discussing the future. Both were painfully aware that the decision to stay together or part ways loomed on the horizon. One evening, Claire received a call from Sophie. Ethan's been making progress, Sophie said. He's talking about things he's never opened up about before. But Claire, he's still torn. I think you should reach out. Claire hesitated. She didn't want to push Ethan before he was ready, but a part of her longed to hear his voice. Finally, she decided to write him one last letter. This time, not to ask for anything but to say goodbye if that's what he needed. When Ethan received the letter, he read it slowly, his emotions shifting with every word Claire spoke of the love they had shared, the dreams they had built together, and her hope that he could find peace, whether with or without her. She ended with a simple message. No matter what you decide, I'll always be grateful for the time we had. Ethan sat with the letter for hours, his heart heavy with indecision. But as the night stretched on, he realized something. He still loved Claire. Despite everything, he couldn't imagine a life without her. The question now was whether they could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Claire's letter weighed heavily on Ethan's mind. Her words were raw and unguarded, reflecting not only her regret, but her willingness to let him go, if that was what he needed to heal. It was the kind of selflessness Ethan hadn't seen in a long time, and it pulled at something deep within him. He found himself staring at the ceiling late into the night, trying to answer the question he'd been avoiding for weeks. Could he truly move forward with Claire, or was the damage irreparable? One thing was clear. He needed clarity. Ethan decided to confront his feelings head-on, and the only way to do that was to see Claire again. The next morning, he texted her, asking if they could meet. Claire responded almost immediately, agreeing to meet at the park where they'd had their first date. The choice of location wasn't lost on either of them. It was a place filled with memories, a symbol of their love at its purest. When Ethan arrived, he found Claire sitting on a bench beneath a towering oak tree, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the past few months hanging heavily in the air. "I got your letter," Ethan began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've been thinking about it a lot." Claire nodded, her eyes searching his face. "And?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm still angry, hurt, confused. But I also know that I still love you, Claire. I don't know what that means for us yet, but I do know that I'm not ready to give up." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't reach for him. She seemed to understand that this wasn't the time for grand gestures. "I love you too, Ethan," she said softly. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we've lost." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. This was the first step, but it was far from a resolution. They talked for hours that day, laying everything bare. Claire admitted the extent of her emotional connection with Adam, while Ethan shared the depth of his pain and betrayal. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was also the most honest conversation they'd had in years. Their decision to work on their marriage wasn't met without challenges. Trust was still a fragile thing, and both of them knew that one misstep could shatter it entirely. They continued therapy, both individually and as a couple, and set boundaries that allowed them to slowly rebuild their connection. But just as they began to find their footing, a new complication arose. One evening, Claire received a call from her former boss, who informed her that Adam had been let go after an internal investigation revealed inappropriate behavior with another colleague. While Claire had already severed ties with him, the news brought back all the emotions she had been trying to suppress. Guilt, shame, and a lingering sense of vulnerability crept in, threatening to undo the progress she and Ethan had made. When Claire told Ethan about the call, his reaction was immediate and visceral. "So, he's finally getting what he deserves," Ethan said, his tone sharp. "Good. Maybe now we can put this behind us." But Claire wasn't so sure. "It's not that simple, Ethan," she said, her voice wavering. "I feel responsible, like I should have spoken up sooner." Ethan's expression softened as he saw the turmoil in her eyes. "Claire, you didn't force him to be who he is. That's on him, not you." Still, the incident served as a reminder of the fragile state of their relationship. Ethan knew that if they were going to move forward, they needed to address not only the past, but the lingering doubts that threatened their future. The turning point came during a weekend getaway Ethan planned as a surprise for Claire. He took her to a secluded cabin by the lake, reminiscent of their earlier years together. His intention was to create a space where they could reconnect without the distractions of everyday life. On the first evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan handed Claire a small, wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound journal with the words, "New Beginnings" embossed on the cover. "I thought we could use this to write down what we want for the future," Ethan explained. "Not just individually, but together." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the journal's cover. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This means so much to me." They spent the weekend talking, laughing, and rediscovering the connection that had drawn them together in the first place. For the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could weather this storm. But the true test of their renewed commitment came a few weeks later, when Claire received an unexpected email from Adam. The message was brief, apologizing for his actions and expressing regret for the pain he had caused her. Claire immediately showed the email to Ethan, who read it in silence before looking up at her. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "I want to delete it," Claire said without hesitation. "I don't need closure from him, I only need it from us." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. Claire's action spoke louder than any words could. It was a small but significant step toward rebuilding the trust that had been broken. As the months passed, Ethan and Claire continued to navigate the complexities of their relationship. There were still moments of doubt and insecurity, but there were also moments of joy and connection that reminded them why they had chosen to fight for their marriage. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan reached for Claire's hand. "I know we're not where we used to be," he said, his voice steady. "But I think we're on our way to somewhere better." Claire smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I think so too," she said, "and I'm willing to keep trying, every day." For the first time in a long time, they both felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were finally walking it together. As the months passed, the scars of the past slowly began to fade, but they never truly disappeared. Ethan and Claire were making progress, yet a sense of fragility hung over their relationship. Every small disagreement felt like a potential tipping point, and every moment of happiness was shadowed by the fear that it could all come crashing down again. The real test came one crisp autumn morning when Ethan received an anonymous letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and inside was a single sheet of paper containing a typed message. "Adam wasn't the only one. Are you sure you know everything?" Ethan's hands trembled as he read the words. A surge of doubt and anger bubbled to the surface, threatening to undo months of healing. Was this some cruel joke? Or was there a kernel of truth to the message? Claire noticed his uncharacteristic silence during breakfast and asked, "Is everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, the letter burning a hole in his pocket. He wanted to trust her, but the seed of doubt planted by the note was too strong to ignore. "I got something in the mail this morning," he said carefully. "An anonymous letter. It said Adam wasn't the only one." Claire's face went pale, her fork clattering against her plate. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You tell me," Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. "Is there something else I should know?" Claire shook her head vehemently, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I swear, there was no one else. Adam was a mistake. One I've been trying to make up for every day since I don't know who sent that letter, but it's not true." Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. She looked genuinely distraught, but the letter had opened a Pandora's box of doubts he couldn't easily close. If that's the case, then why would someone send this who would want to stir up trouble between us? "I don't know," Claire said, her voice breaking. "Maybe Adam. Maybe someone who doesn't want us to be happy. Ethan, you have to believe me." Ethan nodded slowly, though the knot in his stomach remained. "I want to believe you," he said. "But this letter, it's hard to ignore." The letter created a rift between them, one they both struggled to bridge. Ethan began to pull away, retreating into himself as the doubts gnawed at him. Claire, desperate to prove her innocence, became hyper-vigilant, going out of her way to reassure Ethan at every turn. But the tension between them only grew, culminating in a heated argument one evening, when Ethan found himself questioning her every move. "Do you even trust me anymore?" Claire demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. "Because if you don't, then what's the point of any of this?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying, Claire, but this letter, it's like a poison. I can't stop wondering if there's more I don't know." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady as she replied, "Then maybe you need to find out for yourself. If you don't believe me, hire someone. Look into my past. Do whatever you need to do to put this to rest, because I can't keep living under a cloud of suspicion." Ethan was taken aback by her suggestion. The idea of hiring a private investigator to dig into Claire's life felt invasive, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the need for answers. After a few days of wrestling with his conscience, he decided to follow through. The investigator Ethan hired was discreet and professional, promising to deliver a thorough report within 2 weeks. During that time, Ethan and Claire's relationship hung by a thread. They barely spoke, the weight of the investigation looming over them like a dark storm cloud. When the report finally arrived, Ethan opened it with a mix of dread and anticipation. The file contained detailed accounts of Claire's activities over the past several years, including her time at work and her interactions with colleagues. As he read through the pages, a sense of relief began to wash over him. There was nothing incriminating, no evidence of other affairs, no hidden secrets. Claire had been telling the truth. Ethan felt a wave of guilt crash over him. He had doubted her, allowed an anonymous letter to shake the foundation of their fragile reconciliation. He knew he had to make things right. That evening, Ethan sat Claire down and showed her the report. "I had to know," he admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. "I needed to be sure, and now I am. I'm sorry, Claire. I should have trusted you." Claire looked at the report, her expression unreadable. "I understand why you did it," she said, after a long pause. "But it still hurts. Ethan, trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight." "I know," Ethan said, reaching for her hand. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back." For the first time in weeks, Claire smiled. A small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Then let's keep trying," she said softly, "one step at a time." Their journey was far from over, but the experience forced Ethan and Claire to confront the deeper issues in their relationship. They realized that their problems had never been about Adam or the letter. Those were symptoms of a larger disconnect that had been building for years. With the help of their therapist, they began to address the root causes of their struggles, learning to communicate more openly and honestly. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Claire turned to Ethan and said, "Do you remember what Sophie told me when I first called her after the affair?" Ethan frowned, trying to recall. "Something about showing up?" Claire nodded. "She said I had to keep showing up, even when it felt hopeless. I think that's what we've both been doing these past few months, and maybe that's enough." Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's more than enough," he said. "It's everything." For the first time in what felt like forever, they both felt a sense of hope, not just for their marriage, but for themselves. The journey hadn't been easy, and it would never be perfect, but they were willing to fight for it, and that made all the difference. Ethan and Claire had reached a delicate balance in their efforts to rebuild. Each day was a mix of small victories and lingering doubts, but they were slowly finding their way back to one another. However, just as they began to see a faint light at the end of the tunnel, an unexpected storm threatened to shatter their fragile progress. It started with a phone call. Claire was in the kitchen preparing dinner when her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and froze. The caller ID read, "Unknown number," but something about it sent a chill down her spine. Against her better judgment, she picked up. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice she hadn't heard in months. "Claire, it's Adam." Her breath caught in her throat. "Why are you calling me?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp. "I need to talk to you," Adam said, his tone calm but insistent. It's important. There's nothing left to say, Claire replied, gripping the phone tightly. You need to leave me alone. It's not about us, Adam said quickly. It's about the letter Ethan received. I think I know who sent it. Claire's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? I don't want to do this over the phone, Adam said. Can we meet just once? I promise it'll be quick. Claire hesitated, torn between curiosity and a deep sense of dread. Finally, she said, Fine, one meeting, but it ends there. When Claire told Ethan about the call, his reaction was swift and angry. You're not meeting him, he said firmly, pacing the living room. I don't care what he has to say. Ethan, if he knows who sent that letter, don't you want to find out? Claire countered. This could be the closure we need. Closure, Ethan said, his voice rising. You think meeting him will fix anything? He's the reason we're in this mess to begin with. Claire placed a hand on his arm, trying to calm him. I don't want to see him any more than you want me to. But if he has information that could help us move forward, don't we owe it to ourselves to hear him out? Ethan stared at her, his jaw clenched. He hated the idea of Claire being anywhere near Adam, but he couldn't deny that the letter had cast a long shadow over their reconciliation. Finally, he sighed. Fine, but I'm coming with you. The meeting took place at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Adam was already seated when they arrived, looking noticeably uncomfortable. Ethan's presence clearly threw him off, but he recovered quickly, gesturing for them to sit. Thank you for meeting me, Adam began, his gaze darting nervously between them. I know this is complicated. Get to the point, Ethan said coldly, leaning back in his chair. Adam nodded, taking a deep breath. The letter Ethan received, it wasn't from me, but I have reason to believe it was sent by someone at the agency where Claire and I worked. Claire frowned. Why would someone there send a letter like that? Because they had something to gain by stirring the pot, Adam explained. There were rumors about you and me, Claire. Some people thought if they could create enough drama, they might move up the ranks when the dust settled. Ethan's eyes narrowed. So, this was all some twisted office politics? Adam nodded grimly. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I thought you should know the truth. I didn't send the letter, and I'm sorry for everything I did that led to this. The room fell silent as Ethan and Claire processed Adam's words. While it didn't erase the pain of what had happened, it provided a new perspective on the events that had nearly destroyed their marriage. As they left the coffee shop, Ethan turned to Claire. Do you believe him? Claire nodded slowly. I think so. It makes sense in a twisted way. But what do we do now? We move forward, Ethan said, his voice resolute. No more looking back. No more letting other people's actions dictate our lives. For the first time in months, Claire felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point they needed, but the challenges were far from over. A week later, Ethan received a call from the private investigator he had hired. The investigator had uncovered new information, details about the dynamics at Claire's old workplace that corroborated Adam's story. However, there was one detail that stood out. A woman named Monica, one of Claire's former colleagues, had been spreading rumors about Claire and Adam for months before the letter arrived. Monica had always been competitive, and she had openly clashed with Claire in the past. The investigator believed she was the one behind the letter, hoping to create chaos that would lead to Claire's downfall. When Ethan shared this with Claire, she was both furious and devastated. I can't believe Monica would stoop so low, she said, her voice shaking. I thought we were past all that petty nonsense. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You can't control what other people do, but now we know the truth, and we can finally put this behind us. Claire nodded, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. She decided to confront Monica, not out of revenge, but to ensure she understood the consequences of her actions. The confrontation was tense, but cathartic. Claire met Monica at a neutral location and laid everything out. "I know you sent the letter," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You might have thought it would hurt me, but all you did was hurt innocent people." Monica looked taken aback, but didn't deny it. "I didn't think it would go this far," she admitted, her voice filled with guilt. "I was just trying to—" "To what?" Claire interrupted. "Get ahead, tear me down. You didn't just hurt me, Monica. You hurt my husband, my marriage, my entire life." Monica's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Claire. I really am." Claire took a deep breath, her anger giving way to a sense of closure. "I hope you learn from this, because I won't let someone like you have that kind of power over me again." As Claire walked away, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The past couldn't be changed, but she could choose how to move forward. When Claire returned home, she found Ethan waiting for her in the living room. She sat beside him, her expression both weary and relieved. "It's done," she said simply. Ethan nodded, pulling her into his arms. For the first time, they felt a sense of peace, a feeling that, while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, they were finally on the same path. Their journey had been marked by pain and betrayal, but it had also been a testament to resilience and love. As they sat together, watching the sunset through the window, they knew one thing for certain. They were stronger together, and they were ready to face whatever came next. In the months following Claire's confrontation with Monica, the storm that had engulfed Ethan and Claire's lives finally began to settle. The truth about the letter had been revealed, and while it couldn't erase the pain of the past, it allowed them to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. Ethan and Claire continued their therapy sessions, both individually and as a couple. These sessions became a cornerstone of their healing process, offering a space to confront the lingering doubts and fears that had festered for so long. They learned to communicate in ways they never had before, honestly, openly, and without judgment. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. For Ethan, the journey was about learning to trust again, not just Claire, but himself. He had spent so much time questioning his instincts, his decisions, and his worth as a partner. Therapy helped him realize that while trust could be broken, it could also be rebuilt, one step at a time. Slowly, he began to see Claire not as the woman who had hurt him, but as the woman who was trying, every day, to make things right. For Claire, the process was equally transformative. She had been forced to confront the choices that had led her down a destructive path and take full accountability for her actions. But beyond that, she had to face the deeper issues, the insecurities, the need for validation, and the fear of vulnerability that had driven her to seek comfort outside her marriage. Through therapy and self-reflection, Claire began to rebuild her sense of self, independent of anyone else's approval. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, Ethan turned to Claire and said, "I've been thinking about us, about everything we've been through." Claire looked at him, her heart pounding. "And I think we're stronger now," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Not because of what happened, but because of how we handled it. We didn't give up, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to give up," she said softly. "Even when I thought I'd lost you, I held on to the hope that we could find our way back." Ethan reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We did," he said, "and I'm proud of us for that." In that moment, Claire felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. They had faced the worst and come out on the other side, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. As life began to return to normal, Ethan and Claire made a conscious effort to prioritize their relationship. They started new traditions, weekly date nights, weekend hikes, and spontaneous road trips. Finding joy in the little moments they had once taken for granted, they also revisited the journal Ethan had given Claire during their weekend at the cabin, filling its pages with hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. One of those plans was to renew their wedding vows. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about reaffirming their commitment to one another, in light of everything they had endured. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the backyard of their home, with only a handful of close friends and family in attendance. As Claire walked down the makeshift aisle, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers, Ethan felt his heart swell with emotion. In her eyes, he saw the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had hurt him, yes, but also the woman who had fought to make amends and rebuild their life together. When they exchanged their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. They spoke from the heart, acknowledging the pain of the past, but choosing to focus on the future they were building together. It was a testament to their resilience, their love, and their unwavering belief in second chances. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Claire found themselves settling into a new rhythm. Their relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was real, honest, and grounded in mutual respect. They had learned to celebrate their progress, no matter how small, and to approach challenges as a team rather than as adversaries. One evening, as they sat by the fire pit in their backyard, Claire turned to Ethan and said, "Do you think we'll look back on this one day and laugh?" Ethan chuckled. "Maybe not laugh," he said, "but I think we'll look back and be proud of how far we've come." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Me too." The stars twinkled above them, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, Ethan and Claire felt at peace, not because their journey was over, but because they were finally moving forward together. And that's how Ethan and Claire's story ends, not with a perfect resolution, but with the promise of a better tomorrow. Their journey was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the belief that even the most fractured relationships can be mended with time, effort, and a whole lot of heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have handled things the way Ethan and Claire did? Or do you believe some wounds are too deep to heal? And of course, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. Until next time, take care. And remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new.